Hey YouTube, it's Lydia with Sweet King's Garden, and today we're going to check in and see how my plants are doing from the trays that we started several weeks ago and then some last week. And I also have a couple of pots that have more than one plant in them, so we're going to go ahead and split them into separate pots. So I have one plant per pot. So let's take a look and see what we have going on so far. Up front and center here we have our tomato and peppers that we started on March 2nd. Today is March 24th. So what you'll see is that many of these pots have about 2 plants per pot, and the plants have started to grow their true leaves. So it is now time for us to split these into 2. So what I've done is I've written all of the types of tomatoes or peppers that have multiple plants in them, and I wrote a tag because I will have a separate pot now to move them into. And I have the date that I originally planted those seeds and then a transfer date. As you can see, I'm constantly writing things down. But again, this is all just to allow me to see if I happen to transplant a plant and it doesn't do well, I'll know, okay, this was a transplanted plant versus one that has remained in the same cozy pot the entire time. So we'll see. In previous years, I've planted multiple plants in the same pot like this. And if there were multiple plants that germinated, I actually pinched off the extra plant. This year, I'm trying not to waste anything. And if I have too many peppers and tomatoes by the end of this, I'm sure I can find nice homes for them. So I'm just happy to see it looks like most, if not all of the peppers and tomatoes have germinated. My Sweet Bell Rainbow pepper did not germinate, so I actually planted just 2 days ago another seed in that pot. So this will definitely be a late bloomer if it does germinate. But I figured this was my only pot that I had of this type of pepper. I want at least one of those peppers, so that will just be a little late to the game. Here I have 3 pots of tomatillos. This first pot did not germinate anything. However, I do have one that germinated in the second pot, and then I have 3 tomatillos that germinated in the last one. So I'm going to move one into this pot and then another in a pot of its own. I'm seeing that they're pretty tiny, so I'm thinking they're just really crowded. And I'm hoping that once I move those into their own pots that they'll start to develop from there. But of course, time will tell. And then back here we have a second tray that I started on March 7th. So we have a lot of my herbs, and these are items that I had planted and captured that video with you all. So I will link that here above so you can see what that day looked like. It was a very windy day. As you can see, these are my chamomile seeds. And I did have some chamomile that ended up running over, but not a lot. Everything's just looking really nice. I'm excited back here. I have one nasturtium plant that is actually doing well, and I had to re-sow some nasturtium last week. But all in all, everything looks really good. And then from last week's planting, I have some Swiss chard that's starting to come up. And this tray is part of that testing that I have the styrofoam bowls. I have some kale that has germinated. I have more kale, Swiss chard back here, and then a cucumber plant. But I mean, these are just starting to germinate. Now I do want to show you over here. I moved my watermelon that I had planted back on March 2nd. It looked like it was starting to get fried from these heat lamps over here. So I was worried that maybe they were getting too much light, and they're kind of dry, and like the leaves are very brittle. So I am going to have to pull the seed pack that they came in and see if there's anything I can do to help these get healthier again. I mean, the stems are nice and healthy, but it doesn't do any good if it doesn't have any leaves. And then I've noticed that the dill that I planted is starting not to look so great either. My suspicion is that perhaps they had too much light too, so I just moved it over into this red table so that they're not blasted by this light. but I don't know. I've never started dill from seed, so I don't know if it's finicky or if I'm doing something wrong, but I'm going to look it up. Let me know in the comments below what your experience is growing watermelon or dill, and if you've experienced something similar. I'm going to get an area set up outside so we can go ahead and start splitting these peppers and tomatoes that are ready, and we'll go from there. Ah, okay. Oh my gosh. It's in the high 40s. What was I thinking? I didn't go outside for my walk today, so I was thinking it was probably in the mid upper 50s, maybe 60 degrees. But I walked outside and I can see some cold breath. So I was like, this isn't happening. We're moving inside. Okay, so as we're trying to find a nice cozy spot for these plants, this is my cozy spot. So this is what we're going to do. So I have that potting mix, the infamous mix that I've used for my microgreens and the rest of the plants. I added some water, mixed it in, same thing I did for the previous videos. Now, these are my last bit of Bootstrap Farmer pots. So in my last video, I had talked about I ran out of pots. I'm not spending a single dime on more garden equipment. I'm just gonna make do with what I have. So I started using the styrofoam bowls and then those red Solo cups, which I still have a scuffed knuckle from. I actually did have some, I just didn't want to tap into them because I knew I had sowed some multiple plants into the pots that I had started at the beginning of the month. So these I knew I was going to need, and this is truly the last bit of supply that I have. So I have 17 plants that I need to transfer into these pots, and then the 17th will be a styrofoam bowl. So I'm going to go ahead and just fill these up. And then I'm going to show you what these plants look like that are sown in the same pot together, just so you can see how I'm separating them. So I'm going to start a time-lapse video. Feel free to follow along with me. Now that I'm at the end of filling up my pots, I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to make space all the way down to the bottom of each pot, because when I transfer these plants, they're going to have a root system and I want to bury up to the top of the plant's leaves. Now I do recommend, of course everyone knows that my favorite YouTube channel is the Roots and Refuge channel. Jessica has a video where she talks about splitting her tomatoes and peppers, and I'm just following the method that she followed. So please know that I did not come up with this. I am just utilizing a reference. You know, it just dawned on me, I can see some similarities between splitting these plants and the sourdough bread process with feeding and discard, utilizing that discard. For those that are willing and have supplies like extra pots laying around to be able to share, I mean, this is a great way to share plants that you've nursed from seeds with loved ones, friends and family, versus just snipping the extra plants away completely and just discarding. What I have here are tags that I've already written out. So here's just an example, if you can see, of how I wrote out my tags for the extra plants that I'm going to put in these pots. Just to make it easier on me, I just rinsed off my hands after filling the pots. I'm now going to place a tag into each of the extra pots I have, and then as I transfer plants, I'm just going to pay attention to which one I'm grabbing, and hopefully this will make things easier for me. So now I'm going to start pulling the extra plants. So let me see here. Okay, so here's my tray of plants that have some duplicates. I think what I'm going to do move this here as my workspace. I think that's okay. So this is the Ruby Monster hybrid. You see that I have 4 tomatoes. These tomato plants are actually much smaller than my other tomato plants, and my suspicion is that because there's just too many of these crammed into the pots. So I'm hoping I can transplant 3 out of these pots into 3 pots ready to go. And my hope is once they're transferred, they'll be able to grow more successfully. So I'm going to set this tag just aside because we're going to ultimately leave one of these here. Lightly break the tomato plants apart. So we have 2 Ruby Monster plants here. And I have 1 prepared pot of the Ruby Monster with a hole that I already dug in. So I'm going to gently place this tomato plant down to about where the leaves start. So you can see we buried much of the stem, and this is going to allow the root system to grow up to the point to where the dirt is. So now I'm just going to fill in the rest of the hole with dirt, and this is what our new tomato plant looks like. I think I may have put too much water into my soil. Oh well. This is how we're learning, right? So that's my second transplanted Ruby Monster. I'm gonna continue doing this for all of the rest of the plants here. So the Paul Robeson tomato plants look nice and strong. You can see just how long the root system is. They're looking really good. I may be crazy, but I swear I smell these tomato plants already. Some of these pots are drier than others, and I think it's because the root systems on the plants themselves were not as strong or as deep as the others, so it wasn't pulling the water. These Bootstrap Farmer trays are watered from the bottom so that the plants pull in water as they need them. So I think the ones that did not have root systems that went all the way down to the pot to draw up the water are the ones that are drier than the others. So I've never followed this method before where I've planted multiple plants into one pot and then transplanted like this. I've transplanted as plants have gotten larger, but just one plant per pot. So we'll see if I was either too late, too early, or right on time with this. I'm hoping it's one of those things with gardening where there isn't really a right or wrong way. You can still achieve results even if you do it a certain way. So we'll see. Oh, how neat. I don't know if you can see part of the seed that sprouted the plants right there in the dirt. That's pretty cool. I hope you can see that. Some of these plants, most of these seeds I've never grown before. These are all new seed packets to me. But some of these plants I've noticed have what looks like variegated leaves. I don't know if they're supposed to be variegated or if they're malnourished or something. Let's just hope they're supposed to be pretty plants with variegated leaves. Right, so I'm gonna get cleaned up here and then I'm going to show you everything as it sits on the table, but thanks for joining me so far. Okay, so we are now settled in. I was able to squeeze in some of those plants that we just potted up in my project tray with the solo cups and styrofoam bowl. Some of them I was able to put back in the first tray where I started the initial tomatoes and peppers, and then I was able to squeeze 2 of the Paul Robeson tomato plants that we transplanted. I just counted, we have 89 plants that I've started. By far the most plants I've ever started. Last year I think I started about a dozen peppers and tomatoes combined, and maybe not even that much. So I am so excited, very curious to see how all of this turns out. I am also very excited to see how this multi-plant per one cell experiment does. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope I didn't stress anyone out like, girl, you're doing it all wrong. But I mean, if I am, then I'll learn from my mistakes, and hopefully you can learn along with me. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. Feel free to leave a comment down below to share your experience. I'd love to hear about it. Otherwise, I hope you have a great evening. Take care. All right, so I'm trying to get a good angle for you all so you can see what I'm doing here. Oh, I'm so disappointed with the weather. This is, I guess, real disappointment right now. Now, what I've done